Drive to Survive, Season 5, Episode 5. Pardon my French. Why are we going with this title, ladies and gentlemen? It's all about the Alpine. The only French team in Formula 1 at this current moment in time. Remember, they used to be called Renault, and now they are called Alpine. And one of the main characters in this episode is that man, Otmar Szafnauer, who moved from Aston Martin from the year prior. So this is going to be basically all about Otmar and a bit of the Alpine drivers as well. And it ends on a massive bombshell. Let's get into this episode. Otmar comes across as somebody who is very much, a good personality, somebody that you can warm to. You kind of felt sorry for him at Aston Martin dealing with Lawrence Stroll. It was almost like too many cooks were in that team. Alpine were missing a team principal, said the owner, Laurent, who said that they needed somebody to put some management in place and have some structure. And Otmar has proved himself time and time again that he is able to bring results for the team. And yet, contrastly, the portrayal of Fernando Alonso is something quite different. Somebody who's a bit of a hothead, too hot to handle. Something's always going on with Fernando Alonso. And yet, it's almost like he kind of plays to it as well, because he says, you know what, there's good guys and there's bad guys, there's heroes and so on in films and movies. And he says, I guess I'm the bad guy. Now, the thing with Fernando Alonso is he's actually not a bad guy. He's a very experienced guy. He's a seasoned winner, and he will do anything that it takes to win Formula 1 races and championships. And he's got a long history here with Alpine when he was with Renault, two-time Formula 1 world champion with this team. And then we get a little piece on Esteban Ocon, still considered a young driver with bags of potential, even though he's been in Formula 1 quite a few years. He might have had one gap year, but he's been in Formula 1 for quite some time, but still with bags of potential. So we got Otmar, who's the good guy. We've got Fernando Alonso, who's the bad guy. And we've got Esteban Ocon, the up-and-coming, the one with bags of potential coming up. And then we get to the reserve driver, Oscar Piastri, the one that everyone is talking about in terms of the paddock, in terms of all the young drivers, one of the most fearless drivers we've seen since the likes of Max Verstappen and Lewis Hamilton. And Otmar begins to peel the onion with Oscar here. He says that, look, the Alpine team have invested $4 million in this man's career. So they were really putting all their hopes onto him becoming the future of Alpine. It was almost like a given. This is what it's going to be. Doesn't matter where Fernando Alonso is in a couple of years' time. Oscar will be filling in that seat because they all believe that he's going to be a future Formula 1 world champion. So not a bad driver to have in your academy. And then the episode kind of shifts between sort of Alpine versus McLaren. Two teams here that are fighting for the top 4 spot in the Constructors' Championship. And 5th place to 4th place is like tens of millions of dollars. Otmar was saying that there's a difference, that you can get into the double digits in terms of prize money and what you can spend for the next season to improve your car. And then we get to the Alpine home race, which is basically the French Grand Prix. This is the moment, this is the time to be an Alpine fan. If you're French or anything like that, this was the moment that you'll be all been waiting for. And guess what? The Alpine team finishing in the points, both teams in the points there. They had a good race weekend there, and McLaren had an awful race weekend. And in the battle, you see Alonso's experience come into play, where he's defending against the two McLarens, so that Ocon, who earlier had a 5-second penalty for a collision with Yuki Tsunoda, gets back in the mix, and they both finish in the points, which has helped them greatly. So much so that the Alpine overtake McLaren in the Constructors at that point, taking 4th spot at the home Grand Prix in France. It was a happy day for the Alpine team. So everything is going up, it seems, for Alpine. We've seen good things talking about them. And then we get to Oscar Piastri, who they start to focus on just a little bit more. And talk about, co-signing and vouching for a driver. Christian Horner says that we looked at Oscar Piastri in his early stages and we didn't take it on. And I regret not doing that, because he is a future Formula 1 world champion. I mean, the whole paddock, everybody thinks he's going to be the next Formula 1 world champion in terms of the next generation to come. Even Will Buxton as well, co-signing exactly what Christian Horner said. There was nobody who wasn't talking good about Oscar. And yet, Alpine were very sure that they're going to be having him as a future. They kept leaning on the fact that they felt like Oscar was going to be the next person to take over at Alpine. But then we get to the Hungarian Grand Prix. Now, if I go back a year, the Hungarian Grand Prix was a good day for Alpine because Esteban Ocon won the race there. However, all of a sudden you see different drivers, people like Sergio Perez come into the picture on this episode, and it's almost like notifications on the phone, like a tweet or something like that. That's what the tweet bird emoji is, all that kind of stuff started popping up on the episode. And people didn't even realize that Sebastian Vettel was even on social media, because guess what? He wasn't before this moment. And Sebastian Vettel, ladies and gentlemen, breaks the news that he'll be retiring from Formula 1 at the end of the season, right? So they've thrown that in there. You think, why has that got to do with anything? He's at Aston Martin. It's got nothing to do with Alpine. Alpine nor McLaren. But it kicked things off in Formula One. It kicked off silly season, which meant there was a vacant seat at Aston Martin. And all of a sudden, things started to get a little bit fishy out of nowhere with Alpine and Fernando Alonso. Alpine were very clear they wanted to keep Alonso, who was in his last year of his contract, but it seemed like there was a secret meeting going on. Alonso and Lawrence Stroll. Alonso to Aston Martin is what broke later on that week. And the worst thing is the team found out, the whole Alpine team, all the backroom staff, all the people working in the factory, they all found out via social media that Sebastian Vettel was leaving and that Fernando Alonso was going to join Aston Martin. So Otmar addresses the team, he addresses every single staff member and basically mentions that, look, we apologize that you had to find all of this out in the media, but don't worry, we've got Oscar Piastri and we're going to show why Fernando Alonso has made a mistake leaving this team. So Aston Martin then announced Oscar Piastri to take Fernando Alonso's place for next season. But guess what? It doesn't end there. Oscar Piastri then puts out a tweet and says, I will not be driving for Alpine in 2023. I mean, it kicked things off. The bombshell of the bombshell happened and Alpine were in big, big trouble. Then at the same time as well, this is all happening, Zak Brown is talking to one of the executive directors at McLaren saying, look, I think we need to start changing it a little bit here. We need to drop Danny Ricciardo because Danny Ricciardo wasn't doing well. I'm sure there'll be a McLaren episode all on its own there. But Danny Ricciardo wasn't doing any good. And so Zak Brown, early doors, wanted to get rid of Daniel Ricciardo and thought about the prospect of bringing in Oscar Piastri. But the way Alpine were talking about Piastri, it was like, yeah, we're certified, and Oscar's there like, no, we ain't friends. What are you talking about? And the episode ends with Otmar in his car driving and calling Laurent to say, guys, we've got big problems. And people, that's how the episode ends. So there's a part 2 of this episode, if you will, between McLaren, Alpine, Piastri, Fernando Alonso. I mean, it's crazy. It's absolutely nuts. Stay tuned for episode 6.